3 decades which divide the mid-swing 60s and the modern mid-90s hide gradual and minute yearly change in the life and look of Lusk village and its people. It could be said that the 60s were both the parting of the old ways and the beginning of the new ones. On this video, we hope to construct a reference of these changes through the eyes of the camera and the recollections of many of the people involved. It is hard to believe that in 1945 the 5 village pumps were serviced by a Mr. May Potter who travelled around on a bicycle. This was the first connection with the Dublin County Council. Now we have water on tap, sewerage, garbage collections and many other activities which involved our community and Fingal County Council. The availability of new houses is expanding the population of the village. The new people move in, a new and bigger mix ensures a diverse and sparkling community, gathering confidence from the identity of place, which only the passing of time and a willingness of spirit can bring about.
Things I never thought I would see happening to me. And I lay awake at night till the darkness turns to light, hearing voices calling out my name, rolling over and again the same message to me, crying, who's your partner?
I was born here 67 years ago in Lusk, not here, just outside the village. And I was reared in Portrane, and then lived a lot of the time in Swords. I went into the Merchant Navy and spent a lot of time at sea. But 25 years ago, I purchased this house behind me now. My wife and I purchased this house. I know Lusk pretty well, and I've seen it change throughout the years. This particular house belonged to the parish. It was the curate's house. One of the famous occupants of it was a man called Canon Union, who died. It was very friendly people in it, very neighbourly. And it's a very convenient place to live, I find, in North County Dublin, where you're near Skerries, you're near Lochshinny, Rush, Donabate, Swords. And above all, you're within very close distance of the city of Dublin, which is a great cultural centre. So if you want to belong to associations, the Club Dublin is very near, and yet you're in the heart of an agricultural region. I think it's very pleasant to live around here.
Seeing things I never thought I would see happening to me.
I was born in 1990. I should say 1920 because I was christened in 1920. It was December 1990. So I was the second youngest of 9 children. And we were very happy. I was on the farm with my father's farmyard, and we played, and we brought in the hay, and we did different things, and we had a very happy childhood. Not much money, but very, very enjoyable time. I went to school over in the Lusk National School over there. It was built in 1700 and something. And there was 4 rooms in it. And infants, 1st, 2nd, 3rd class were in one class, 4th, 5th, 6th were in another room. So there was only 2 teachers to teach all those classes. And the boys were downstairs and they were the same. But the boys wouldn't be let out for their break with the girls because we weren't allowed to mix the boys and girls together. So we'd come out at 12 and we'd go in at 12:30 and the boys would come out at 12:30 and go in at 1. So very happy times we had there. Hadn't much money or either, things were bad, but we walked a mile from the station every morning. We walked home in the evening time. And then I left school and I stopped around with my mother. She did work and I fixed up and tidied around the place with her and helped her. And then at 17, I met the man I married to, and I got married to him. So we went to live in Lusk, Post Office Road, Lusk, and I had 17 children there. But times again were hard, but I started a shop in Lusk, and I did fairly well. During the war, it was during the war, 1939 to 1945, and things were very scarce. But whatever way I could wrangle them, I got them, and I brought ice cream back to Lusk because there was no ice cream in the town. So my family grew up, and my eldest daughter then decided to start a Mochran firm, and then she gave it up and I started it then. And we did great things for the children in Lusk with the Mochran firm. We were in St. Patrick's College, we had concerts, we brought money to Biafra in 1957. All my family then got married, and they're all married now, and I'm living here on the Green with my husband and myself, and we still get involved. I'm still in the community council, I'm still in the senior citizens. Although I'm a senior citizen myself, I'm still there. So I'll still carry on, I think, till I'm not able to carry on. I have 64 grandchildren, and I have 9 great-grandchildren. I'm married 57 years this September. So 57 ups and downs, but happy years for us.
I lay awake at night till the darkness turns to light, hearing voices calling out my name, rolling over and again the same message to
This is our local curate's house here, and the fundraising for this house was done by people like my mother, Eilish Hand, Mrs. Jenkinson and Mrs. Clinton, and they used to have a competition of who would have the biggest stall down here on the left. One would be raffling off a calf and the other would be a pig and perhaps a donkey or a pony, wherever it was, and a lot of money was made. We had a marquee then which would go on for a couple of days, and the money was also given for our local school. Now Ailey and my mother cycled as far as the Walterstown to collect for this, and it was a great tradition, and they looked forward to it every night. They'd cycle off. So I've got lots of good memories.
I was born and reared here on the Green in Lusk, and of course, without being biased, it's my opinion that the Green in Lusk is one of the most beautiful and picturesque areas of the village. Situated on the Green, you have all the important facilities going back over the years that people would have used, such as, we'll say, the most important one, of course, is the church, where if you want to get married or go to religious ceremonies, or unfortunately if you want to get buried. So most people came to the Green for other reasons, such as the schools, which is situated, the old and the new school, and then you have the library, where a lot of the most important events would have taken place, and where there was held such things as lectures, concerts, great variety and drama shows all over the years. And in the latter years, of course, you have different classes, and I don't know now if they're doing the line dancing, but there is other dancing classes and different sporting activities goes on there. Jack Dennis, of course, is using it for the judo. And then adjacent to the library, you have the old schoolmaster's house, Ned Dones, who so happens that my brother Liam now owns that and is living there. And they were very well respected people on the Green in those times. We'll go on then across from between, we'll say, the church and the library. You have the bandstand, and of course this is very historic in its own sense, because the Black Raven Pipe Band, as most of you would know, would have been formed in 1910 and you would have had a lot of the founder members in or around the Green area, like Jack McNally was one of them, Charlie Horley, who was since passed on, and of course the old band room was on up further up towards the top of the Green, and many a good night would have been had by the children and the people in the village in the summer evenings when the band would come out and practice. Of course, my own father at that time was in it, and two of my brothers, Liam and Paddy, and Uncle Dick. It mainly consisted, I suppose, of three families that time. Was the Clares and the Russells and the Boylans made up most of it, and no disrespect to the other members who made up the full band, it was and still is one of the most important organisations in the parish, and has always been associated with the Green throughout the years. I suppose if we go further on up the Green, we would come to hands. And years back, I would say 1950s, you would have had Hans shop, which was not a terribly big shop, but very, very successful insofar as that it catered for everyone's needs in Lusk. They came from out the country, as we would say, such as the Five Roads, Colcott, Jordanstown, Nicetown, and usually it was run by Mrs. Hand, Mrs. Teresa Hand, and her husband Robard. They were always coming and going. Of course, Robard never stopped coming and going because he was involved with the farm with his brother Tomas. And on occasions then you had his sister Ailish, who had to in turn go then and help in the shop, because it was, as I said earlier on, the main shop in Lusk, and you could get whatever you wanted. And when there would have been a marriage taking place, the rig-outs would be usually ordered and brought home from town by Mrs. Hurley or Mrs. Hand or a Bard. And the grocery end of it, of course, was very, very successful insofar as that it catered for everyone's needs in the village. And of course then you had your hardware, your bit of painting, your sausages and rashers and puddings. So say everything was catered for, and everybody was quite happy with the shop at the time. We go across then from Hand Shop, which now no longer exists, and you had the Cruise family. They would have been another old and respected family on the Green. You had Paddy Cruise, which is now in charge of the graveyard, and of course he's a very, very skilled carpenter by trade. His father, Mickey Cruise, was one of the old style tailors, and many good man, he would have made the famous made-to-measure suit, which seems to be a dying trade now unless you go to Dublin. There's very few tailors knocking around, and he was one of the old style. And then you had his brother Joey. Joey Cruise was one of the most famous characters on the Green. He was very, very interested in astrology. He was able to forecast the weather and be able to tell the farmers in the area, give them a good idea as to when to sow and when not to sow, because he could read the stars very, very well. And he was terribly, terribly interested in all of that area. When we were children, we didn't quite understand what the man was talking about, but as years has gone by, we now realise he was a man way ahead of his times. Further on up the green, of course, you had another farming family, Danny and Agnes Ryan, very hard-working people. Agnes, of course, now has since passed on, and Danny is in his 89th year and would be one of the oldest members in Lusk at the present time, one of the oldest members of the community. Very interested in his latter years now in his son-in-law's big fishing trawler, Kevin McHugh, who was one of the biggest, I suppose, fishing boats in the world. But that's Danny has never lost, we'll say, where he has come from. He's still very, very nice, very well respected in the area. Of course, up further then you would have had the Nana Cowley, another, we'll say, character in her own way. Very nice person and very kind to the people, a very, very good neighbour she was. And then up further you had Jack McNally. Jack McNally was a founding member of the Black Raven Pipe Band, and he was involved in the 1922 Rising. Actually, he did fight in the Battle of Ashbourne, and he had a sister called Margaret who was in the Cumann at the time, and she also done her bit for Lusk and for Ireland. A few of the other older characters and respected people that we would have on the green would have been Charlie Hurley and Peter McNally. Peter, I think, is the oldest person on the green. He's now in his 91st year. May not be correct, but I'd say if he's not the oldest person, he's one of the oldest people on the green. And next door to Peter, you have Mrs. O'Brien, and her husband Tommy was also a character, and he would have worked for the parish priest, Father McMahon. And one thing I'll always remember about Tommy was that, and of course all the other people that went to the school, every August when we went, well, September, when we went back to school, Tommy would always arrive with bags of apples from the orchard, from Father McMahon's, and of course they were a great treat for us to get the apples. Modern times, I suppose, on the green, it hasn't changed a terrible lot. You still have most of the same families that was here 50 years ago. It's the change that has taken place is very, very small insofar as progress, because we have lost the shop that we have had on it. The few new modern houses that's gone up. Nice to have new neighbours, all right. But I can't think of anything else that has been modernised on the green. It's still the same as I remember it basically 40 years ago.
So when we were coming home from school, we passed the library building. And the library building, the Carnegie Library as it's known, had a small portion of it for the books, and then a hall for concerts or whist drives or whatever might be held to support the parish. There were jumble sales and that. And indeed I performed on that stage myself in a hillbilly outfit when they had concerts to raise money. And whist drives were a very popular thing at that time, and the chairs had to be collected from the village. And 3 or 4 of maybe the senior altar boys of that would be asked to collect these chairs from the villagers. And some of them might have 4, some of them might have 1. So it was a good thing, a great thing if we got a house where we had 4 chairs, we had less visiting to do or calling to houses. But the stipulation was that those chairs had to be returned the next day, and they were returned undamaged. And it was a great help because we had already had 50 chairs belonging to the library, and we had to get the balance to make up for these. But my father was librarian there for many years. It was open on Wednesday night for an hour and a half or 2 hours, and then on Sunday morning it was open between mass times for an hour and a half. And quite a few people used collect their books there, and the population in Lusk then was only about 450, 500 people. It's a great difference now because we have such modern buildings in Autumn Park and the various estates around Kelly Park have greatly increased that number. But if we come down the road to another memory of mine was Clinton's, which was the house that Dr. Riley was in before he went off to live in Balbriggan, or the other year. And Clinton's was a fine farmyard that collected the corn in the present gateway of it. It was a very, very dangerous gate. It's closed up. And Kevin Davis and Peter Gaffney were men of strength, character, and they were tremendous workmen. And they'd be drawing in the hay on bogies, and my memories of the bogies coming up from their house up the Dublin Road, and I was a loud gent on the bogie with the name that comes to me is Jack Brown of the Train Hill. Lord rest him, he's dead now. But we rode on the back of the bogie, possibly because we conduct ourselves, because everybody who knows the bogies and understand that if too many bodies went on the back of the bogie, the lever shifted in the front and it went down, so accidents could happen. So we were careful not to allow that happen. But yes, John Clinton was a chain smoker, and one evening he asked me would I take the reins of the second bogie to drive. Could I drive a bogie? And I never drove a bogie, but I instinctively said yes, I could. And sure, I hadn't to drive the bogie at all. It just went behind the other horse in front, and we collected our cock of hay and brought it back down again. And I remember getting a half-crown, which was a lot of money then, a half-crown for doing that, and I was made up for a few weeks with this half-crown. But at the corner where Clintons lived was a little shop, Kelly's, a sweet shop. That was the mother of Eileen Sweetman now, and it was a great place for the gathering of the old people. We had the Sherrys and the Monkses and various other names that gathered there in the evening, plus a lot of us who would be normally playing football, hurling and that. It was a great hurling village. And we learned our hurling from these lads at the corners, telling us what to do and how to do it. And, indeed, Lusk won the junior championship in hurling in 1930 before I came along. But it was these men that stood at the corner, and after we'd have a match, the discussion would be about the match and who should be dropped and what should happen, and we'd be on a bicycle sitting at the corner. But I remember in 1948-49, Joe Carton, a famous name who looked after the club for many years, coming to me and asked me as a young lad, would I take a hurley? And I said, well, I'm afraid of hurley because I've only left school and I'm afraid to take a hurley. So he said, well, look, take a hurley, because he said, we never gave a walk over in our lives, and we've only 14 men. Just take the hurley and go out on the field. So I was a bit nervous taking the hurley. I said, right, I'll try it. And my next memory was at that particular hurley match up in Swords, of the officials saying, take him off, take him off. And my shins were marked. I do believe the shin marks are still on my shins from the hurley belts that I got. But subsequently we were talking about the match at the local corner down at Kelly's and Denton's, and I was sitting on my bicycle, and Tommy Monk's, Lord of Mercy on him, called me over, and he says, come here to me, you. And I got off my bicycle and went over to Tommy, and Tommy said, as long as you're in Lusk, don't ever let me see you with a hurley again. So I was a bit perturbed about that. I said, I won't take a hurley anymore. But so the week afterwards, Joe Carton came to me again. He said, will you take a hurley again? And I said, oh no, Tommy Monk said I'd never take a hurley again. But he said, we've no man to take it, so I took it again. So within a short space of time, within 6 months, I was sitting on my bicycle after a match, and the same Tommy called me. He says, come over here, and I thought I was in for a telling off again. And I went over to him a bit frightened, and he said, you know something? He says, you're the most improved hurler here, he says. And don't ever let me see you putting your hand up for a ball, but swing on it, he says. Take it in the air, or on the ground, but don't let me see you putting your hand out for a ball. So that was nice to hear that. And within a short space of time, I was centre field within 9 months. And the following year, we won the Dublin Junior Championship in 1951, it was. And it's ironic that in 1951, with the same 15 players that won the hurling championship, we with the exception of one, we nearly won the Dublin Junior Championship. We played our near neighbours 3 times in Rush, the Moors here. So that was another memory. But in those days we had hurling, football, and handball. The ball alley was a great place where you could spend many hours banging the ball up against the sidewall. We played shorts, a game of shorts, which was played from sidewalls. And the way we used to play it was one would get in and challenge another, and if that person won, they'd stay in on the alley, and at the alley as they call it, and another guy would challenge you, and if you were good, you could remain there until you nearly fell prostrate. You'd be beaten through fatigue. So they were happy memories for me. And the football field, which used to be in Raheny football field, we went over after Mass there, and we kicked football from after 11:30 Mass until maybe 3 o'clock. And we'd go home, and our dinners would be in the oven, and Mother would say, your dinner is destroyed and it's burnt, it's in the oven for you. But it was worth it, because with no televisions and no fancy pubs to sit up in front of, and that's the way they spent their time, kicking football and hurling. But yes, Lusk has changed a lot. There's a lot of new houses at Orland Park and Kelly Park here around back of us here. But they say it's for the good. Some people don't think that, but it's progress. Let's put it down to progress. I've memories too of that little pump down at the gate. That pump that's inside our gate. The people from practically half the village at the time took the water from that little pump, and I have still got it going. I fixed it when I came back here 20 years ago to live. and I put new washers on it, and it's now pumping away, but we don't have the same number of people drawing water. We don't have anybody drawing water. It may not be fit for drinking, but I certainly use it for doing plants and all down around the back of the gate there. Well, Mrs. Dixon, who lived in Jack Brown's house across the way there, used to work for the barracks, the old barracks over here. They used to work when there were 5 guards, and she did some work there in the morning, and she drew the water from that pump to the barracks. And this morning she came down, and a varicose vein burst in her leg as she pumped the water. And instead of coming up to the house or going back to the barracks, she went for home. Her home at that time was up beside Mackey's in Mrs. Donoghue's shop, a little shop that used to be there. And she went up to there bleeding, and you could trace it the whole way to the shop, where they lived, beside Mackey's. And she died some hours later. She actually bled to death. And it was a very sad thing, because she was a grand old lady with a velvet dress down to the feet and down to her toes, and they were lovely memories. But I remember the present barracks being built. That is opposite the RIC barracks, as it was known. Darcy's now live in a family by the name of Darcy's, and I have in my possession a letter from people who lived in that house before it was the barracks, or it was the RIC barracks, and they emigrated to Australia, and they set up a clothing in Bloemfontein, a clothing business, and I still have the heading of the paper inside, and it's called the Irish Free State Clothing Company, and that was in 1895 he emigrated. And he wrote to my father. He wrote to my father in 1946-47, inquiring about a lot of people who worked in the old Belruther Union, mentioning all these names like Taylors and the Maguires and John Martin, Lord of Mercy on him, and a lot of people, Tommy McArdle, Dan Sherry, they inquired about all these people, were they still alive? And my father wrote back to him, and I have a copy of the letter that my father wrote back to him. And whatever happened, he was to come to Lusk, and he mentioned this in his letter to my father. He was to come to Lusk through London and pick up his daughter, but the very words he used were the Hitler's madness. That was the 1939 war, prevented that from happening. And he also had a grave somewhere up in the Catholic Church. And he asked my father would he get a surround put on the grave for him, and he would pay him for it. And my father, to this day, I don't know, but he wrote back to him saying he got that job done on the grave, and various things, and the bill, let's say, was £8 or £6, but he got no return, and one feels that he must have died or something, you know. There was no messages after that, but the letters give you a lot of information about the old people that were around at that particular time in the village. But yes, Lusk is a quaint little spot, and I'm happy I'm born and reared in it, and I hope to die in it. Three generations of the Jenkinsons in Lusk, and I think that's Lusk enough, or Dublin enough, if you want to put it that way. Thank you.
So far as I can remember, my father and mother were both from Lusk. This house that I'm living in at the moment, my grandmother built it in 1918, and I was born on the house across the road, which was bought for him when he got married. My grandmother was a shopkeeper here. The parish was very, very big. The village was small. Everybody knew everybody else in it, because the mode of transport then was just bicycles, walking or bicycles or pony and traps. The county council, there was quite a number of people working with the county council those days, and everywhere was kept so clean. The men going along, they always kept the roads clean. There was a man working on the roads all the time, and the other men then were cleaning and cutting the hedges and the ditches. And other men then were used, had horse and carts, drawing stones and that for the tarring of the road, you know. We had Murray's bottom shop and Murray's top shop, and you had Connors. There was trees of Connors down where Clinton's bungalow is now, and there was a brother of ours had a bungalow where the Dennis's bungalow is up on the post office road, the top of the post office road. Sweetman's I remember here as Thatcher's. Tommy Sweetman and Joe Sweetman. Joe lived in New Haggard and Tommy lived opposite where May Russell is now, but they were great. That was mainly their job. There were an awful lot of thatched houses here at the time. When I was young, we used to hear the bell ringing for the service there on a Sunday morning, and we used to be always wondering what it was like, what the church was like. But there was one time when an old lady died here, Mrs. Haslam. She was a lovely person, and a lot of the people, like the neighbours, went to the funeral, and some of them went into the church, some of them were afraid to go in. But afterwards, we had a curate here at the time, and he asked some of them if they went to the funeral, and he said he couldn't give them confection. That was how liberal we were those days. That's right, the cattle sale yard was owned by Rooney's, James J. Rooney. His nephew was Eamon Rooney. I think he was a TD for Dublin, for North Dublin afterwards. A lot of them around used to bring their cattle there. They had periodic sales in it. That's now where Murray's Conrad's is.
There was a time not long ago when people stopped and stood and talked, and lifted caps to ring in bells, and bid you fortune on your way, when streets were dark and times were hard, and nature's way was understood. And Sunday was a day for prayer, a day to rest, a day to share a yarn or two. There was a time not long ago when fortune was a healthy child, a horse, a cart, a field of hay, a letter from America. When sense of time and place and worth were values of a simpler way, which brought contentment out of toil, enriching all who felt the pain of life. There was a time not long ago when life was lived in black and white, dark was night and light was day, no in-between, no shades of grey, no shadow on a man's esteem, or mad confusion in his head, no rush, no fuss, but pleasant day of honest work, for precious pay than rest and play. There was a time not long ago when everybody knew my name, and I knew theirs and what they did, and whence they came and where they stood. While much has changed, our village still is cherished by both old and new, and in our time in every way is just the place it was that day not long ago.
I was born in a place called Clare in the County Clare around 1928. So we had a small little farm, just kept a few cows, 3 cows, and went to the creamery. Then we had, that time you went to the fair, you bought 2 pigs, 2 bottoms, you know, they were about £0.50 each that time. And you rear them for 3 or 4 months, and you kill one and you brought the other one back to the fair and done the same thing over and over again, you know. So there was 8 in my family, 5 sisters and 2 brothers, 3 brothers, and we're spread all over. We have 2 sisters in New York, 2 in Thurles and Tipperary, 2 in Clare at the home, and 2 in Lusk. Like we were like the goats, we were let out in pairs. So I came to Lusk in July 1944, and I think it was £3.50 the fare was from Kilrush. Well, that time we came from the West Clare Railway. It was on that, like, before it closed down. And landed in the station with a little green ribbon and my bouquet there, and Mr. Mackey picked me up there, and we came as far as Swords, with friends in Swords, neighbours of ours. And I think the buses that time only came as far as the big tree in Swords. There was a big tree at the pub there, and was you go in to Swords from the Lusk side. That we used to have to go there the Sunday and pick up the buses there. They'd wheel around there and back to Dublin again. And then I came on here to Lusk. That time there was no water supply in them years, and we had to I sunk our own well. It was still on going, you know. And then that time there was no lovely pads and Lusk like it is now, you know. And the evening for sport you went over to the nearest football field there, you know, over the Rush Road at the ball alley they call it. And we just go to the pictures and the bicycles to Rush and maybe Balbriggan. One time we rode out to Ballsbridge to a big show thing that was there from here. No lights, the bicycles, no nothing. But then there was a sale yard thing in Lusk down at the corner. Them years, like once a month I think it was. Of course that's all gone now. And nearly all the people, all down houses were all thatched at the time. There's only a couple, I think there's only 2 families now left, Angers and McDonald's there at my time. The rest are all gone, you know. But then we used to keep greyhounds here as well. We often had 25 greyhounds. And we used to have to walk them every morning, maybe get up at 6 o'clock. And it was a long days. It could be from 6 o'clock until 11 o'clock. For at that time, you got 5 shillings a week for a long week. But I had me keep as well. Like I came here to Joe Mackey and Bridget Mackey, and they were great people. Like I was only about 15 at the time, you know. So they kind of reared me. During the war years, we used to have the tea here, you see. It was, you weighed it out, 9p packets, 1 shilling packet, and 1 and 6. And you see, you had someone come in, they'd look for the 9p or the shilling one, and if you put the 1 and 6 and the 9p one, it was better. You know, they thought it was, but that time it was hard to get tea, and everything was rationed. Butter and everything. Butter came in 20-pound, 28-pound cartons, boxes, you know. And you had to cut that up there with a knife, so much a ration each. And the tea was the same. It's tea, sugar, but everything was, flour was rationed in them times. Very happy days when I came to Lusk. And a lot happier, I think, than they are now, you know. As a PP said here one time, Father Steele, I think it was, he says you were better going out of Lusk now than coming into it, you know. And that always stood in my mind, like and I think he was right. People are richer now and everything, but I don't think they're happy. No, the happiness is gone, I think, from the home. From my days, like when we were kids, like we'd be singing around the fire maybe night time at 8 o'clock, no electricity, maybe the light of the fire, you know. But you had the fire that time was on the hob, you know, and the crew with the hanging down. But that's all gone. But there was some of that in Lusk as well. There was a good lot of little old mud houses around the place as well. And they used to have the little beds, bunkers in the mud. The walls were about 5 feet wide, you know. And they used to have sleeping in them. Of course, they were very dry. But that's all. We've gone into mod now. And we used to go to the football, everything like that. I enjoyed life from the time I came. I got good health, thank God. And I was well looked after with Mr. Mackey and his wife. They died, they're exactly 14 or 15 years dead. They died within 10 months of each other. And I missed them an awful lot. Like, to be in your own house for the first time, alone, no one, left. There was no one to talk to. It was it's a big ordeal. I didn't know how people feel when all their parents and all, and they're left alone. But I was they warned me when they were going, never to give in. It was my life here, not theirs. Look after myself and doing what I was always inclined to do, And there was great people around the town, great neighbours, and Patty Kelly's there, her father-in-law was a great pal of mine, and the McNallys, and I can't leave out one man, and that was Nicholas Rooney of Quickpenny. He was great to me in my young days. If I was in trouble, no matter what happened, he'd drive me to Skerries or drive me to Dundalk if I was stuck. Like, you don't get them now, them people are all gone. But outside that now, I suppose, we're lucky to be. Of course, the meat trade now is gone actually. The small butcher is on the way out. I'd say in another 4 or 5 years there'll be no small butcher now like me here. Probably this is the end of the era for this part, Like one time when I came now, the meat was around a shilling per sirloin, 9p for roast egg and 6p for boiling beef. And now sure it's £4.50 a pound and £3. The difference there is in the times as it goes on. I remember an old man, he used to come here, me, and was up the road there. He'd come down every Friday, and he'd come in, he had a pound, and he'd have his big bag, and there was a chair with a counter there, and he'd sit down in the chair, and he'd get the pound, he'd have the pound in his hand, and he'd just drop it down the counter. That was a pound's worth of boiling beef. They never fried anything in them days. And he'd get that for the week between a couple of them. So that's the way, but I suppose everything nearly comes to an end sooner or later, but I suppose we'll have to struggle on for another bit. But now Lusk is grand, since they started to do up the streets and the flowers, and we have to thank Mrs. Kelly and Fred next door, Mr. McCarthy, and Mr. Flynn over at the ball alley for all that. They're doing great work.
Not really from this area. I was born in Bray, but my mother was Welsh, as you can see the name of the house, and my father's from England, and I was born in Bray, so we came to Skerries to live, and then I got married then, and I'm 30 years in here, living in Lusk. So very happy living in it. There's a good few changes, which there was a lovely house over there, a thatched cottage over there with a shop in it, and then it used to do great trade here, and then that was broke down, new one built. But the people here are like a big family. They're beautiful people here. No matter, you'll be never in trouble or anything. If you want anything done, they come to you. But it's a beautiful place to live in.
Right. My name is Michael Huzzy, Senior, for the purpose of income tax. I'll use the senior bit as well. I came into this village, my family and I moved to this village here on December the 4th in '78. So we're practically 17 years here come the end of this year in this village of Lusk. When we came into the village, it was a very quiet little village. It still is a quiet village, but not very much to see, not very much to do in it. That would appear to be the situation. This housing development here now is about 460 houses, or possibly more than that, in the entire Orland Park complex. And in the 17 years, this complex is more or less now fully and finally developed. The village itself hasn't changed in so many ways as one would feel there were obvious changes, but there are changes in many areas. For instance, some of the characters of the village have gone ahead of us now saying it, but they've still left a great impression, and they've left a good sign of the wit and humour that still prevails in this village. For a village of its size, I was amazed that there could be so many activities in the village. You've got senior citizens activities, you've got tidy townspeople, you've got a very strong guild in the ICA, you've got a very strong Boy Scout movement, you've got two interesting football clubs, a soccer club and a GA club, which in the last 7 years have all come to the fore. In that particular regard, the village the characteristics of the village haven't really changed in that sense, but there's a lot more to do, a lot more things to see, a lot more things to play, whether it's football or whatever it is. We've also got a number of golfing societies which have only been formed again in the last 10 years out here. So the village itself, I hope it doesn't change to the extent that it loses its own identity. I'm confident that it won't, because the characters in this village are such, and particularly the families who have been living here traditionally speaking maybe for a couple of hundred years and more, and going back to that time, their attitudes and their humour and their kindness will still prevail. For instance, if in this village you wanted to get something done, it would be a major mistake on your part to go along and ask anyone and say, look, I want this done on such a day, because it won't happen. However, if you want to go along and say, is it possible to give me a dig out on such a thing, you'll have all the help you want and all the guidance and all the good humour that goes with it. The village itself always has maintained a good sense of humour. We only have, as you know, on the social side, two bars here, the top shop and the bottom shop. And between the two of them, there's a great sense of rivalry at all times, whether it's in sport or whatever. But again, it's a character of the village that if you're in the top shop, you're one man. If you're in the bottom shop, you have to be some other man. In the cell, excuse me, in the village itself, if we say, no matter what things bad are here, local people, I mean traditional local people, they never think it's really that bad at all. There was one guy who was telling me one day that he hadn't been in Dublin only once, and obviously the last Innocence Bill had been taken down. So, you know, to an extent that perhaps they didn't miss much. On the other hand, if you met a guy coming down the road and he had his head under his arm, after with something, and you said to him, how's it going? He'd always reply to was near to bother. So you have this kind of good-natured, good-humoured attitude to life prevailing in the village itself. There was a case where this village is very specialised in the ancient and Irish art of nicknames. And some nicknames would be incredible. They'd be either relating to an event, a place, or something in which some person was involved. I also called one where this friend of mine, Mr. Stokes, who was always involved in the local filling station here, John Kelly Gorge. And he was a grand old guy to go up there on a frosty morning. I always remember one morning complaining, it was such a cold morning. He said, not at all, it wasn't that bad at all. He was telling me that in his day, when he was a young man, you worked the fields, but you saved the potato stalks of the winter, because you'd reap them up when they were well dried, and you'd be able to heat yourself up in a winter's morning while you were still working the fields. And it was this type of character, and the way they could deliver all this kind of wit in a natural way. There was nothing planned. There was nothing rehearsed. Just spontaneous humour. And this is a side of our village that hopefully we will be retaining as the years goes on. I'm very happy, my family and myself, having moved to Lusk 17 years ago. My three children are now married. We assumed, as most parents would, that when they'd married, they'd move off to another part of Dublin, maybe Dublin South County or whatever it would be. But no, they're all living here. Two of my family are living here in Orland Park, and the third guy is living in quite near us here in Rush. So again, it shows that there is something in this part of North Dublin for lots of people. And hopefully, as time goes on, the village itself will not outgrow its own old charm, and indeed and lose some of the people. We had some great characters who have now gone ahead of us here as well. Just said earlier on there, we had Mickey MacDonald, and when we moved in here, when my family and I moved in here, just at the beginning, at the top of the road as you turn in here, it was a ditch, and it was really a mess of a ditch. It was vermin infested as well. And I remember a few of us got together and we decided to try and clean it up for the sake of, not sitting around looking at dirt too long. And in doing so, we enlisted the aid, very professional aid, of some of our local people, like Michael Sievers up on the Commons there. He had a JCB, and we had Mickey MacDonald, a dear friend of mine too, who died there very sadly there a couple of years ago. And these lads came down with their JCB, their truck, and they moved heaven and earth in a few days. Someone sold it. I think the county council got embarrassed about this, and they decided they better finish the job, which they did. So arising from that, we can boast in Lusk the only bush shelter in North Dublin, along the side of the main road as you come in. And that was mainly done by the efforts of a few people, local people, and a few newcomers in this village. And it was that type of cooperation that got the village going. And in the time when we came here, we didn't have a tidy town council or committee or anything like that in the village. And again, a few of us got together, both men and women in our village, and we started a tidy town association. And in the early days, we got a lot of support from people, driving past in their cars and that sort of thing. Moral support, you call it, thinking physical. But having said that, it has again progressed to an incredible level that we are receiving, and particularly with Patricia Kelly, who is really has this Tidy Towns committee over the years, and she has a fantastic way of pushing people into situations. Even if they don't want to be in it, she ends up getting them in it, where everybody works as a great team, and the results are there. They're evident for everyone to see. The village itself has absolutely transformed itself into a conscious. There's a consciousness in the village by lots of people now who maybe 10 years ago I would never believe would even have that consciousness. That yes, we can do something with the village and we can make it tidy. And indeed we can sit with the best and give them all a good run for the money when it comes to effort. And we have this type of effort, sustained effort all the time. And in the other associations here, whether it's senior citizens, whatever it is, again, there's always great support for everything. And I do honestly appreciate very much my family and myself, that over the years, that no matter what you wish to get involved in, there was always someone around to say, come on, let's have a try at this, and to give you an idea how you can do it, or help you in more ways than one would ever imagine. So it's a village, not too big in size, it's very big in heart. And I think that's what makes Lusk a very special village for me and my family over the last number of years.
Years living on the green. We're very happy and I love it here. And when my husband, Robert, died, I remarried 5 years later. He's 23 years dead. And Charlie Hurley. And we were very happy. With Charlie we had only 14 years. But of good memories, great memories. I've been involved in the church work for 17 years, and my job is the laundry. I take care of that, and they're a great crowd of workers. They were tremendous, but they're getting slacker now. We haven't as many helpers, but people are involved in their own work and their own jobs and working. And it's still going on, thank God.
Yeah, well, I was born and reared in Lusk, and all my family, 7 of us, and we were all reared in the main street in Lusk there, and most people were poor. Like most people were very poor. Were poor, and work was very scarce. There wasn't a lot of employment in Lusk during this, but anybody that did work worked mostly with the farmers, and the wages were very small. some of the men that worked on the table with farmers got as low as £3 a week for working. And there was we had a lot of thatchers. We had the Alan Murray from the Man of War. He was a very jolly. The present time, you see, our problem is that with all the machinery and all the JCBs and all the big machinery they have for making roads and that, there's hardly a job for a man at all. When the road was widened from between Blake's Cross and Mortis of Loch, 100 men started on the Monday morning to widen that road with shovels and spades, and everybody had to bring their own shovel and spade. And McGee's of RD made shovels, and the spades all came from Newry. There was a factory in Newry making spades. But I think on the same morning, the Land Commission had bought Belleley, Thunders and New Haggard, and there was about 70 men started there with spades and shovels to divide up the land and distribute it out to all the farmers. This land was taken off all our farmers in Cromwell's time. The officers and servants, the officers of Cromwell's army got all the land they wanted for a penny an acre. And that land was divided up. About 70 men started with shovel and spade. And Matty McCann made up a bit of a song about it. He said, and it went, I bought a spade all Newry made, and a shovel from RD. And he said, Grandma Cree, believe in me, courage soon was gone. When the foreman said, move on ahead, and kindly let me see how the ditches was made with the Newry spade and the shovel from RD. So you see, today, machinery, this machinery and all the computers and all the robots has the world don't know what they're going to do with mankind, where we're going to get work for mankind. When we talk about Lusk, we have to talk about the Reman Farm. The Reman Farm, everybody in Lusk, most people in Lusk were employed in the Reman Farm. The ladies were all employed in the canteen, and there was certainly dance every Wednesday night, and for the soldiers and the officers and corners every Wednesday night. Anybody from Lusk could go to that dance. But then the ladies from Lusk were all employed serving out tea and cakes and ham sandwiches on Wednesday night. But then you see the soldiers were trained to swim both horses and mules, and Johnny Sherman told me there was you could easily see 100 horses going into Rogerstown or to swim across from there at the over to the borough there, over to Port Anne at Rogerstown Quay there. So you could see 100 so the officers had to train these men to swim horses there and then come back. But apparently during the 21, I believe, our old IRA ordered the British out and let all the horses out and burnt it down. And the result was Christian McGuinness' father told me the next morning the paper stated Lusk a ghost town after the departure of the British, because everybody was most people in the town were unemployed. All the farmers around Lusk that had hay and oats and mangles to sell had nothing to do, only ring the major or go over to the major and ask him, did you want so many tons of hay, and he would say take it along. And when they would draw them with the horse, they would get 2 loads of manure going out for the farm. Anyone that came in with hay took out 2 loads of manure along with them. that was the manure came out from under the horses. And then of course the station at Lusk was a hive of activity with the farm too, with all the peat coming in for to bed the horses and all that. And it was a very busy place at that time. Tom Ash was a teacher in Cardiff, and he promoted lots of the football and hurling at that particular time when Tom Ash was here, and up to Lusk won the Dublin Junior Champ 1933. Lusk won the Dublin Junior Championship. Lusk spoke nothing about only hurling and making hurls at night. There was hardly a house in Lusk that hadn't a workshop making hurls. Eamon Monks, Dan Sherry, Fonny Grimes, Tommy Grimes, only shared in the Carduff, Nico Sherwin. All those men had workshops, and indeed the farmers were out at night with lamps watching the lads at night, watching the lads from cutting the young ash. You see, the young ash was had to have a turn on it into the bank, and the lads were out at night cutting young ash trees for to make hurleys. And it was nothing unusual to see 30 fellas hurling in Rooney's field on Sunday morning, and all the summer, every evening. Lusk was the home of hurling, and at that time spoke nothing, talked about nothing, only hurling. Nobody had any money like to go to the pub to drink. It was money was scarce. Tom Ash, of course, was the man that started the Black Raven Pipe Band, and there's lots of lovely photographs all around the town with Thomas Ash leading the Black Raven Band. And he of course died in England on hunger strike. And a brother of mine, Dickie Bentley, was played in the band at only 14 years of age in his bare feet. And he milked a cow after school for Matt McCann up on the green, Matty McCann worked on the county council with a horse, and of course he wasn't back till 6 o'clock, and Dickie milked the cow every evening for him, and he learnt him to play the pipes. He was a piper with Ash. Lar Meehan on the Commons, he was one of the Irish speakers in the town. He learnt Irish at the head school down at St. Mavie. And when we were children coming from school, Lar would call us in Irish, and we would run away because we weren't able to answer him. And he used to talk Irish both to the horse and to the cattle. And he lived on the Commons with over the hill lane there with Janie, and they lived on the barter system. They brought eggs into Mackey's and Murray's every Wednesday and Saturday, and they exchanged the eggs for groceries. And they also sold the cattle they had to Murray's. Murray's had a butcher shop that time. They sold the cattle, and that paid their rates. And they had about 60 hens and a winning machine. I used to, when I was a little lad, even used to a flail. They used a flail to thrash the oats. Had a big shed of oats in tied in bundles, and he'd take that out and flail it, and then threw it into an old winning machine and turned the handle and blew the chaff all out the door. So who else were we talking? We were talking about in Lusk. Then we had Jimmy Meehan and Dick Meehan. They worked on the permanent way on the railway, and as a young fellow I used to churn for the sister with the churn. She made butter Wednesday and Saturday. and they seem to be all, they'd one cow and they seem to be all living fairly well, fairly comfortable like with at that time, you know. Lusk was the home of storytelling and Carduff, where old people sat at the fire and told stories to all us young lads, and tell us stories about the leprechaun and fairies and that. And when we'd get out that night, maybe at 9:30 or so in the dark, no lights in Lusk, we'd run home flying, because the story about the fairies and the banshees and all that, the old fellas be telling stories with the banshee and seeing the banshee down in the commons and that, you know. The new system that's on now, everybody, anyway that dies now is brought to up to Rock's funeral parlour, but that time the wakes were all everybody was waked in their own house, and people sat around all night talking and saying the rosary and all that during the night, and it was the custom that the room was never to be left without somebody in it during the night, and certainly everybody was waked in their own house. That was the custom of the Irish custom at that time. Well, of course, there's an interesting thing at Rogerstown there which we must mention about. Rogerstown was a hive of activity at that time, with the coal boat came in from Liverpool with 250 tons of coal, and there was a little miniature railway, and the coal was pushed in on the railway into the big shed there, and Nicky Carty was selling the coal out, and it was a hive of people going down, and particularly Saturday morning, people going down to get a bag of coal or 2 bags of coal in the big shed there at Rogerstown. Well, of course, Rogerstown served all the borough in Portran. The men in donkeys and ponies came across down at the corner, the far side of Johnny Kelly's cottage there, and they came across and came up at low tide and went back quickly right away, and of course it also served Lusk and Rush with coal. Everybody went there, in particularly Saturday morning, or well, it was open during the week. Nicky Carty was the man that sold the coal out there. Roasting the turkey on front of the fire, there was no ovens, or very few ovens around at that time, and I know my eldest brother Willie Bent, he sat up at night and roasted the turkey in front of the fire on a chain and a swivel and a big tray of grease underneath, and you'd have to had a big spoon, and you'd have to pour the grease on top of the turkey, and the turkey would be spinning all night. It'd take about 9 hours to do them, I believe, on front of the fire. And of course then Lusk and Carduff was the home of card playing all around Christmas. The turkey drives in people's houses, where a farmer's wife would rear 20 turkeys, and she would have 2 Saturday nights playing for the turkeys. The house would be full of people playing for the turkeys for a shilling for 3.25s. Anyone that won 3.25s would get a turkey. And we played when I was a lad over in Paddy O'Hara's on the Ballybochel Road there, and I remember leaving it one morning and going to First Mass in Lusk after playing cards all night in a turkey trial. Monica made tea at 3 o'clock and sandwiches at 3 o'clock, Monica O'Hara. And then there were all the farmers that had turkeys played 3.25 for them on Saturday night, and that's the way they were sold. And of course we have to talk about the big whist drive in Lusk in the library, the big £10 whist drive, and Lord of Mercy and the drummer Merrill won it twice, and the result is that the stewards stood around the table and watched him. He won it 2 weeks in succession, the big £10 whist drive. You see, men only had 25 shillings a week that time. Well, of course, we have to talk about then the olden time Jimmy Rogan. Jimmy Rogan was a haulier around Lusk, and he carried both turnips and hay and anything that was to be brought to the market. Jimmy had a lorry, but in 1933 the government decided on buying all these hauliers off the road, and Jimmy had only one lorry. And I remember Dickie, Lord of Mercy, Ornament, and Stokes Kelly, Lord of Mercy, was making the second lorry up, and they said for Jimmy to have two. And Jimmy sold them 2 lorries, and he got £1,500 for 2 lorries at that time in 1933. And he went to Dublin the next morning. He bought a new lorry for £250 and a little baby Ford for £125. And of course Matty McCann made a song up about that that whole thing. Matty said the Great Northern Railway Company paid the compensation, and Matty wrote a song about the Northern men are getting soft, you'll hear the people say. They compensated Rogan and they took his trucks away. They gave him £1,500 and took him off the road, but now he has a Bedford and a little baby Ford. When he got the compensation, he said, oh, this is grand, and the only plan for me now is to go out on the land. So he started growing cauliflowers and cabbages and beet, and now he's up to Deb's old plan. He said, we'll grow the wheat. The wheat lay very flat and highest. 'Twas worse on the Reeman farm. He said, we'll walk next Sunday, boys, it won't be any harm. But the lads that wouldn't hear tell of it, he didn't give a jot, for he'd young born from the cottages and Teelan from Coalcott. But Teelan only came one day. He wouldn't come any more, with an old lad from Balrotherry you never saw before. Dinny left him home that night, and he would not come back. He's a man that minds the cattle, and they call him Paddy Black. So the mill it came next Monday, a wet and windy day, and we went over to the wedge town to tighten down some hay. Hold me there for a minute. So we turned it and we twisted it, and it came like soot, and when he came home from Liverpool, he left the blaming butt. One of the big nights for all the young lads in Lusk was, and it appears that the mill never came to McAnally's in the post office road or Bill Stevens. It never came till night time, because when they finished the last job at 6 o'clock, particularly in October, November, it'd be dark, and there'd be all the children in Lusk would be up in the post office road looking at them. You can understand taking the mill into McAnally's above, and it would take them about an hour to get it in. And Neddy Hughes, Osborne's of Darderstown were the people that trashed both in McAnally's of the post office road and Bill Sweepman's. Osborne's of Darderstown, and Neddy Hughes was the engine man, and there would be about an hour getting that mill into McAnally's on the post office road, because the road was so narrow and the opening was so narrow. And Neddy Hughes would be roaring and shouting. We would be all running around the mill, and they would be shouting at us to keep clear. All our people, Johnny Bentley and my father, they worked in the brewery, Watkins, can you stop it? Watkins Brewery, and I think it was known before that as Darcy's Brewery. Watkins bought over from Darcy's, and the beer came in at the station. It was all carted in by horse and cart and stored in Brown's, the brewery, and delivered all around then to the publicans all around County Dublin. And
well, here we are in Lusk. I'm reminded of my own school teaching days in this desk from the local national school. Lusk is an historical centre, and it's part of the largest constituency in the greater Dublin area. From a political point of view, Dublin North returns 4 members out of 166 to Dáil Éireann, and currently boasts a diversity of traditions. with the Labour Party, Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael and myself, Trevor Sargent of the Green Party, representing the area. Going back, however, over the years, in 1944 there were 5 TDs elected here, but Lusk was part of a much larger constituency of County Dublin at that time, just over 20 years after independence that was, and the voting reflected strongly anti and pro-treaty traditions. Fianna Fáil had 3 TDs, Sean Brady, Patrick J. Fogarty and Patrick Joseph Burke, whereas Fine Gael had 2, Liam Cosgrave and Henry Morgan Dockrell. Moving on to 1948, this saw real changes when the constituency was divided and 2/3 of the electorate left to become South County, with the result that County Dublin, this part, returned 3 TDs, namely Paddy Burke of Fianna Fáil, Eamon Rooney of Fine Gael and Sean Dunn for Labour. These 3 TDs held sway in Lusk, really, for nearly 10 years, as a group changing in order, but staying on until Fianna Fáil, Kevin Boland, toppled Sean Dunn of Labour. However, in 1961, 2 more seats were added, and Sean Dunn, standing as an independent Labour candidate at the time, won back his seat, and the other new seat went to Mark Anthony Clinton of Fine Gael. By 1965, Sean Dunn was back in for Labour, but Fine Gael's Eamon Rooney lost out to the newly elected Des Foley of Fianna Fáil, who benefited from the huge Paddy Burke surplus. In 1969, Dublin County North, as it was called, became a 4-seater again, and Burke and Foley of Fianna Fáil, with Clinton of Fine Gael, were joined by the new intellectual, as he was called in the Labour Party, Justin Keating. 1973 saw the end of an era, or perhaps the beginning of an era, when Rayfield P. Burke succeeded his father to join Clinton of Fine Gael and Keating of Labour. However, the Foley seat was lost to another Fianna Fáil councillor this time in the west of the county, Sean Walsh. 1977 Dublin North was changed again to a 3-seater, and Ray Burke was joined by John Boland of Fine Gael and Joe Fox of Fianna Fáil, just from down the road in Skerries. 1981 tipped the balance for Fine Gael, with John Boland and Nora Owen taking seats after Ray Burke. In 1987 saw a swing back for Fianna Fáil when G.V. Wright took the Nora Owen seat, but in 1989 Nora Owen took back the seat and Sean Ryan of Labour was elected for the first time. Coming up to the present, 1992, Dublin North, with a fast-growing population, became a 4-seater, and the present lineup of Sean Ryan, Ray Burke, Nora Owen and myself, Trevor Sargent, was elected in November of that year. Now, many of you will have stories and memories of the characters I have mentioned. Perhaps some of them contain elements of legend or indeed myth, but they are very, very precious, as newspapers I've been looking at the time rarely tell of the details that we want to know now about the candidates at that time. Indeed, it seems they presumed that their readers knew enough about their candidates. So if you have any memories, you really should write them down, because they will be lost for all time, and that would be a terrible pity. So I'll leave that with you, because politics, going back over the years, is something that everybody has their own memories about.
In the vivid and interesting recollections of the people interviewed, the changes of our village were mostly of a gradual nature over 50 or so years. The old school replaced by a much larger and modern building, the GAA and soccer club, with fine pitches and other facilities replacing the strip on the ditch of yesteryear. The demise of the many small shops, the motor car which has replaced the bicycle, the pony and trap, the tractor and horse. The personalities of the different priests, the Garda, the doctors, the teachers, and others who passed through all have a place in somebody's memory. Most of the old families have been touched by the scourge of emigration, Many of our fine young people have enriched other lands. At least the young who now emigrate have more confidence and better education with which to shape a life in a strange place. Still, many have reason to look back in anger. What does the next 30 years have in store for Lusk and its people? The diminishing economic prop from the EEC will have a serious national consequence. Through its many dynamic organizations, Lusk can contend with inevitable change. The quality of its people remain its prime asset.
I'm here all alone. But Daddy's a sailor, never comes home. Nights are so long, silence goes on. I'm feeling so tired.